Joining us now is Christina Clark Okarmus, the Executive Director for the Alabama Campaign for Adolescent Sexual Health. Christina, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And a big APT welcome. This is your first time joining us here in studio. We love having first timers. Our previous guests were first timers, so we're 2 for 2 tonight so
Awesome.
far. I know that you have been really involved in the trenches, on the ground, with this adolescent sexual health work for years.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I started this work in 2011, fresh out of grad school, and you knew our predecessor, or my predecessor, Jamie Keith. So she hired me straight out of grad school, and I just have been here ever since. I think in 2019 is when I became executive director. Jamie retired, and I just have a real passion for young people receiving the information that they need about their bodies and how they work and how to make them healthy. And I didn't receive sexual health education, or at least not anything to brag about in my time at school. And so I think it's just a really important thing for young people.
I think I have the same story. I don't remember any real lessons in school. My mother was very open with me in talking about it, so I got my education from her.
Good.
And I'm really glad that I did. And I know that's a huge part of what you all do is educating parents, students, kids, community partners, all of that above. So when I hear adolescent sexual health, that's a pretty broad term. What are we talking about here?
Yeah, so, for us, sex ed, we really are looking to advance comprehensive sex ed. And so sex ed, by that we mean everything that really would touch on things related to relationships, healthy relationships, bodily autonomy, consent. Of course, the ins and outs of how just things work, that anatomy and reproductive anatomy and physiology is so important. Menstruation, puberty, it really runs the gamut, quite frankly. Sexual assault prevention, those sorts of things. And we are very focused on getting the message out to young people through the adults in their lives. So you know this, that we have done lots of trainings over the years, probably hundreds of trainings over the years of what we call youth serving professionals. So those folks that work with young people in some capacity. They're educators, they're school nurses, they are sometimes coaches, they are school counselors. They're interacting somewhere with young people in their lives.
Even community partners like Boys and Girls
Absolutely,
Clubs.
Yes. I failed to mention that, but absolutely. We've worked with Boys and Girls Club before. And so, yes, we are looking to reach those adults that can reach their young people with this information. And parents are such a critical part of passing on this information. We want to empower parents to have these conversations with their young people, to feel confident and comfortable having these conversations. So a lot of times parents don't feel that way. Even for me who works in sexual health, being a mom, it's kind of daunting to think about having those conversations. But I know that there are tools that are out there, that there are folks that can guide me in the right direction. And I was just having a conversation the other night with some parents of preschoolers, and they were, right on the right track in terms of talking about consent. The whole, we sometimes think of it as like the good touch, bad touch conversation.
Yes.
But even just consent for hugging your child or giving them a kiss, or my daughter now she tells me when she doesn't want her picture taken. And that's all part of consent. We don't think of it that way, but it is all part of consent, and empowering our young people to say, no, this body is mine, and I'm allowed to decide what happens to it. And so we want to empower young people to have that feeling, and then also to empower parents to give them that feeling.
And I'm glad you mentioned parents, because I have to be very honest. As I told you before we started the interview, I have a stepdaughter who's been married for several years.
Yes.
She and her husband just had their first baby a few months ago. And I still find it hard to have that sex conversation with her, or to even fathom that in my mind. And she's very grown.
Yeah.
So what do you hear from parents? They have to feel empowered with the information that you give them.
Yeah, it seems like what I hear mostly is, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that there is someone here to talk to us about this, because maybe they didn't know it. Sometimes that's the case, if they just didn't have that information themselves, because unfortunately, we haven't had great sex ed in this state for a long time. And so sometimes parents just don't have the information themselves. Sometimes it's just a discomfort. A lot of the times I'll tell parents, it's not one conversation. I think when I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, it was like the big talk. And now we tell parents it's many conversations happening over the lifespan of your child, and finding those opportunities in everyday circumstances. So you watch something on TV. Oh, did you notice that relationship? How did you feel about that? What did you think about that? Or maybe it's something they hear in music. Oh, that was an interesting lyric. Like, how do you like that? Doesn't sound like consent to me. Or how do you feel? Just like prodding through the everyday things that they're experiencing.
And it makes it a lot more user friendly. It's not as though the parent is poking and picking, but we're having a very generic conversation about
organic,
something.
Yeah,
very organic.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the word I was looking for.
Yes,
organic.
Organic.
You mentioned sex education and it being lacking.
Yes.
What is sex education curriculum? How does Alabama address that in our schools?
So unfortunately, Alabama does not have a state sex ed curriculum. We do have a sex ed law that requires, if schools teach, so they're not required to teach, but if they do teach, that they should emphasize abstinence, but also talk about various forms of contraceptive measures in a medically accurate way. So we think that that's actually pretty good from our comprehensive, trying to advance comprehensive sex ed perspective. Comprehensive sex ed is the whole bag. It is abstinence at some point in a person's life. Certainly for our younger folks, we'd hope that's what they would choose. But when they get older or when they enter into a romantic relationship, sex may be on the table, and then we want them to know how they can protect themselves. Even, once folks get older, there might be periods of abstinence where they need to know how to negotiate that within a partnership. And then certainly when those periods are over, they need to know how to negotiate condom use or get on the right contraceptive for themselves to prevent an unplanned pregnancy, but also certainly to prevent STIs, HIV, and also just to be empowered. It's not all just about preventing things that are unwanted, but also just to feel empowered and like they can take care of themselves.
Because you all track, in addition to teen pregnancy rates, you all track STIs, those types of rates and that data as well.
Yes.
What have you found?
So we found that teen pregnancy rates for the last 10 plus years have steadily declined. Same with teen birth rates. We're still quite high compared to the other states in our country, but we're declining. Unfortunately, STI and HIV rates do not see the same decline. So what we kind of guess is that young people are beginning to feel more comfortable using contraceptive measures, but not so much condoms. And so there's still only about a 50% rate of young people who are engaging in sexual activity that are using condoms when they're engaging those activities. So because of that, we're seeing higher STI and HIV rates. In fact, Alabama, I believe, the last time I checked, we have 3 of the top 20 cities in the country. So unfortunately, we're quite high, Montgomery being one of them.
Well, we know one thing that you're doing to wrap and bringing this all together, connecting government with the everyday people, is and I'm going to read this to make sure I say it correctly. Today wraps the end of the National Sex Education Week of Action.
Yes.
Talk about that national campaign.
Yes. So we are partnered with a national organization, SECUS, and they are all about advancing sex ed nationally. And so this is the second annual National Sex Ed Week of Action. And so they are working with states across the country to implement action plans. So we've been implementing this plan all week on our social media pages, on our website. We had, I think we're going to talk about it in a second, but we had an event prior to the week. And then we have our Advocacy Day coming up, which I think we're also going to talk about. So I'm just going to plug those here. But yeah, so the idea is, what is sex ed in your state? What are areas for growth? Where are things that are not so great, and what can we improve on? Sharing sex ed stories. I've heard a lot of stories of young people over the years about just their sex ed being so lacking. Or unfortunately, we also hear about really shameful sex ed where, you chew a piece of gum, and if you have sex before you're married, you are like that piece of gum. You're used. And we've heard lots of different, like with rose petals, the same thing. Kind of this analogy of.
And I heard that no man wants a flower that's already been plucked. Those types of
Yes,
things that you're
yes.
talking about.
So
Yeah.
unfortunately, those ideas still exist out there, and we want to be there to say, well, actually, we don't really have an opinion, I guess, really about young people having sex, except that we want them to be empowered and safe, and we want them to do that at a time that is right for them. We want to give them all the information that they need to protect themselves.
And you want to remove the shame and the stigma if they do go down that road, because they might want to take a different direction, and you want young people to know that they have a support system in their adult community that will help them whatever direction they choose to take.
Absolutely.
Well, let's jump into what you did in Alabama. I thought it was very creative. So
Okay.
talk about the Alabama work that you all did for this Sex Education Week of Action.
Yeah, so we had a little bit of fun creating some postcards. So this first one says, support young people making healthy and informed decisions, sex ed for all. And then this next one is help people prevent unplanned pregnancy, comprehensive and inclusive sex ed for all. And so what we did was we had two events on February 3rd and 4th here in Montgomery. We opened it up on our socials. We tried to get some folks to attend. I think we had about 20 folks between the two events. And we wrote like 120 postcards to Governor Ivey, to the Lieutenant Governor, to Attorney General Steve Marshall. We wrote to a lot of our local state legislators, just letting them know the importance of comprehensive sex ed for young people. A lot of people shared their stories about how they didn't receive sexual health education. A minute ago you talked about the shame. Another reason that's so important to destigmatize and de-shame sex ed is because some young people go through sexual assault situations where they didn't have a choice. And so there were stories like that were shared. And they were just really powerful stories about how young people need access to this information because us as adults didn't get it, or it was given to us in a really harmful way, or in a way that further traumatized us maybe. And so we hope that the governor and our state legislators are willing to hear that message and see what they can do to improve sex ed in Alabama.
A couple of things I want to hit on before we leave. I know our time is winding down, but these are, I think, two very important pieces of our conversation. I know one of the things that you all are concerned about is the reversal of Roe v. Wade.
Yes.
Got a little tongue tied there. Sorry about that. Talk a little bit about why that is of concern to the work that you do.
Yeah. So our primary concern, because we don't really work in the abortion space, but our primary concern is that the same sort of logic and argument that was made to reverse Roe v. Wade will be, we believe, used to reverse access to contraception for all people, for unmarried people. Could also, these long-standing Supreme Court decisions that were made, back in the 60s and the 70s and the 50s, allowing us to have access to contraception, they all stand on this right to privacy. And so we're concerned about that. We're concerned about the potential reversal of LGBTQ folks being able to be married, because that is a population that we very strongly support. And so we just want to be sure that those things aren't rolled back. And then I think we're also just concerned because it takes away a little bit of that bodily autonomy, not a little bit, a lot of that bodily autonomy. And that is something that we are in strong favor of, is folks having the information that they need to make empowered decisions about their body and what's best for them and their families.
And if I remember correctly, when I was researching, preparing for this conversation today, there was also some concern about how that could be a possible attack on sex ed curriculum in school.
So, yeah, I'm not sure how that might all work out, but I do know that there has been a big push for parental rights lately at school board meetings. And, the Alabama campaign certainly believes that parents have a place in the conversation around sex ed. They are the best educators for their young people. They should be the first educators for their young people. And sometimes they just don't have those tools, and that's where we like to come alongside and help them. But with the parental rights groups, unfortunately, it's pushing out the right for all young people to have sex ed, because they typically want their young people to not receive any sex ed at school. But that takes away the rights of other young people to receive that education, which could be life-saving education for some young people. And so I would just say to those groups, whatever you want to teach your young people at home, that's great, and we support that, and that schools do have a place in the sex education conference. We have a captive audience in public schools where we can really be changing their lives and giving them life-saving information that they will use maybe now, but maybe not until they're adults. And regardless of when they use it, they need that information.
Okay, and I want to drive home that you all use evidence-based curriculum. Research in the trainings that you do.
Yes. So any sort of curriculum that we do or professional development is all based on evidence-based curricula or evidence-informed curricula. We are always medically accurate, age-appropriate. I know age-appropriate can mean different things to different people. But so, for instance, I have a preschooler. When we talk to her, we use medically accurate names for all of our body parts. That is actually a great tip for preventing child sexual abuse, is to empower your young people to know what all their body parts, including their genitals, are called. So we do that. We ask if we can hug. We ask if we can kiss. When I pull out the phone and she says no pictures, I don't take her picture, because we're trying to teach her your body is your own. You can say no, and that's okay. You can say no to an adult, and that's okay. So that's age appropriate for her. But age appropriate for a high schooler is information about condoms and contraceptions and things that they will need to be healthy for the rest of their lives.
And what age range do you target? I know you adolescent, so what age range is you?
Yeah, so we have resources on our website for really almost any age, but we are really targeting that what you would typically think of as adolescence. So 13, some people only think till 18, but we really go all the way up to 24 because the science has shown that brain continues to develop even into the 30s sometimes. So we really are looking like 13 to 24-year-olds.
Well, look, as we conclude this conversation, and we have a graphic with your website on that, we're
Great.
going to put up on the screen and the full name of the organization for anybody who might want additional information or may want to contact you. But I am well into my 50s, 52 as a matter of fact, and I am still developing and learning a lot. I learned a lot from our conversation today. Christina, it was truly my pleasure to have you here. There's so much more we can talk about. We have to have you come back.
I would love
and
to
continue these conversations. It'll be post-session if we do.
Okay. Can I plug the Advocacy Day real
quick?
quick?
Yes, let's mention this. Definitely mention your
so
Advocacy
we are
Day.
partnering with AIDS Alabama this year, which is an AIDS service organization out of Birmingham. They actually have an office in Mobile too. But they are going to be doing an Advocacy Day on April 6th. We are joining with them, and our talking points will be around comprehensive sex ed, advancing comprehensive sex ed for this in the state. We're hoping to have a number of young people there to share their message. So if you can join us, we will have registration information on our website very soon.
And would that be here at the State House?
Yes, it will be here in Montgomery at the State House. I believe we're going to have like a rally and some lunch and some speakers, and then of course we'll be at the State House to talk to our legislators.
And I know that address all too well, 11 South Union Street, Montgomery 36130, because we are
right
in the State House as well. Christina, thank you so much, and thank you all. We'll be right back.
Thank you, Karen.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page.